The setup nobody saw coming. Sometimes the moments that change everything don't announce themselves. They don't come with dramatic music or flashing lights. They sneak up on you, disguised as ordinary days, ordinary decisions, and before you know it, nothing is ever quite the same again. This is one of those stories. It was late autumn of 1991, and Keanu Reeves was 27 years old. He had just finished filming Point Break, and his face was starting to appear on magazine covers and entertainment news segments. People recognized him on the street now. They called out his name from car windows. They asked for autographs at gas stations and grocery stores. But here's what most people didn't understand about Keanu back then. Fame terrified him. Not in the way you might expect, not the kind of fear that makes you hide in mansions and travel with security teams. It was quieter than that, more personal. He grew up moving constantly, changing schools, never quite belonging anywhere. His father left when he was 3. His mother worked in the music industry, which meant long hours and unpredictable schedules. Keanu learned early that the only person he could truly rely on was himself. So when fame came knocking, he didn't know how to answer the door. He smiled in interviews because that's what people expected. He said the right things, showed up to the right places. But inside, there was always this voice asking the same question: do they actually see me, or just what they want to see? That question followed him everywhere that fall. One evening in early November, Keanu found himself at a charity gala in downtown Los Angeles. It was one of those glittering events where celebrities gathered to raise money for children's hospitals, everyone dressed in expensive clothes, champagne flowing, photographers positioned at every corner hoping to capture something worth printing. Keanu stood near the back of the room, nursing a glass of water. He wasn't good at these things: the small talk, the networking, the performance of being a star. He watched other actors work the room with practiced ease, shaking hands and laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny. He wondered how they made it look so effortless. That's when he noticed her. A young girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old, sitting alone at one of the tables near the stage. She was wearing a dress that looked a little too big for her, probably borrowed or handed down. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was staring at the tablecloth like it contained the secrets of the universe. Something about her stillness caught his attention. In a room full of movement and noise, she was completely motionless, not in a peaceful way, but in the way people become still when they're trying very hard not to be noticed. Keanu set down his glass and walked over. "Hey," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Mind if I sit here? These parties kind of exhaust me." The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes widened when she recognized him, but she didn't say anything. She just nodded, then quickly looked back down at the table. "I'm Keanu," he said, even though she clearly already knew. "I know," she whispered. "I saw Bill and Ted. My brother loved that movie." There was something in the way she said "loved," past tense, that made Keanu's chest tighten. He didn't push. He just sat there with her, letting the silence exist without trying to fill it. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "My name is Maria. I'm here because my mom works in the kitchen. They let staff families come to the dinner part, but we have to leave before the show." "That doesn't seem fair," Keanu said. Maria shrugged. "It's okay. I don't really like crowds anyway." They talked for nearly an hour. Keanu learned that Maria lived in a small apartment in East LA with her mother and grandmother. Her brother Daniel had passed away 2 years earlier from leukemia, the same disease this charity event was raising money to fight. He'd been 16. Maria was only 10 when it happened. "He used to sing," Maria said quietly, "all the time. In the shower, while he was doing homework, just walking down the street. He didn't care who was listening. He said music was the only thing that made sense when nothing else did." Keanu listened. He didn't offer empty comfort or change the subject. He just listened, and in doing so, gave Maria something she hadn't experienced in a long time: the feeling of being truly heard. "Do you sing?" Maria asked suddenly. Keanu laughed, caught off guard. "Me? No, I mean, I've tried. I played in a band for a while, bass guitar. But singing," he shook his head, "not my strength, definitely not my strength." Maria smiled for the first time that night. It was small, barely there, but it was real. "Daniel always said the people who think they can't sing are usually the ones who need to sing the most," she said, "because they haven't learned yet that it's not about being good. It's about letting something out that needs to come out." Those words hit Keanu harder than he expected. He thought about all the feelings he kept locked inside, the grief he'd never fully processed, the loneliness that followed him even into crowded rooms, the constant sense that he was performing a version of himself instead of actually being himself. Before he could respond, a man in an expensive suit appeared at their table. He was one of the event organizers, all smiles and aggressive friendliness. "Mr. Reeves, there you are. We've been looking everywhere for you. We have a little surprise planned for later tonight, and we really need you to be part of it." Keanu felt his guard go up immediately. What kind of surprise? The man's smile widened. "Well, we're doing a little talent show, celebrities performing for charity, totally casual, totally fun. And we thought it would be hilarious if you sang something. You know, since you're not really known for singing, the audience would love it." The implication was clear. They wanted him to embarrass himself for entertainment. They wanted the laugh of watching a famous actor do something he wasn't good at, all in the name of raising money. It was the kind of request disguised as a compliment, the kind that made Keanu's stomach turn. "I don't think so," he said quietly. "That's not really my thing." But the organizer persisted, and a small crowd had gathered now, other celebrities and donors watching the exchange with curious eyes. The pressure built around Keanu like walls closing in. He could feel his face flushing, his heartbeat quickening. And then Maria spoke up. "You should do it." Keanu looked at her, surprised. "Not because it's funny," she continued, her voice stronger now than it had been all night, "but because Daniel was right. Some things need to come out, and maybe," she hesitated, then met his eyes, "maybe you're one of those people who needs to sing even though you think you can't." The room seemed to hold its breath. Keanu looked at this 12-year-old girl who had lost her brother, who sat alone at charity galas because her mother worked in the kitchen, who carried a weight far too heavy for her young shoulders, and he realized something in that moment. She wasn't asking him to perform. She was asking him to be brave. The same way her brother had been brave, singing down the street without caring who listened. The same way she was being brave right now, speaking up in a room full of strangers who had more money and power than she would probably ever have. Keanu took a slow breath. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll do it." The organizer clapped his hands together triumphantly, already imagining the headlines. But Keanu wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at Maria, and she was looking back at him with something that might have been hope. Neither of them knew it yet, but that decision, made in a single moment of connection between a lonely movie star and a grieving young girl, was about to change both of their lives forever. And when Keanu finally walked onto that stage later that night, he would discover something about himself that he had buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. But that's not the part that stunned everyone. What happened after he started singing, that's what nobody, not even Keanu himself, could have possibly predicted. The stage that changed everything. You ever notice how the longest walks are never measured in distance? They're measured in heartbeats, in the weight of what's waiting at the end. That walk Keanu took from his table to the stage couldn't have been more than 50 feet, but it felt like crossing an ocean with no shore in sight. The room had shifted now. Word had spread that Keanu Reeves, the guy from Point Break, the guy who played Ted in Bill and Ted, was actually going to sing. People were already smiling, already nudging each other, already preparing to laugh. This was exactly what the organizers wanted, a celebrity making a fool of himself for charity. Good entertainment, great headlines. Keanu could feel every single one of those expectations pressing against his chest. The stage was small but brightly lit, with a single microphone stand positioned in the center. A house band sat behind it, piano, guitar, bass, drums, professional musicians who had been playing smooth jazz between speeches all evening. They looked at Keanu with polite curiosity, waiting to see what song he'd choose so they could follow along. But here's the thing nobody knew. Keanu hadn't chosen a song. He'd agreed to this without any plan, without any preparation, without any idea what would come out of his mouth when he opened it. He reached the microphone and wrapped his fingers around the cold metal stand. The room quieted gradually, conversations dying down as faces turned toward the stage. Somewhere near the back, camera flashes started going off. Keanu squinted against the lights, searching the crowd until he found what he was looking for. Maria, still sitting at that same table, Her eyes were fixed on him, and even from this distance, he could see something in her expression that grounded him. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't smirking. She was just watching, waiting, believing. The lead musician leaned forward. "What are we playing, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu's mind went blank. Every song he'd ever heard seemed to evaporate from his memory. His palms were sweating. His throat felt like sandpaper. This was a mistake. This was such a terrible mistake. And then, from somewhere deep in his memory, a melody surfaced. "Hallelujah," he said quietly. "Leonard Cohen." The musicians exchanged glances. It wasn't an easy song, emotionally or technically, but they were professionals. The pianist nodded, placed his fingers on the keys, and began the slow, haunting introduction. The first few notes filled the ballroom like water rising, and suddenly the room felt different, smaller, more intimate. The laughter that had been building in the audience started to fade, replaced by something else, something uncertain, something waiting. Keanu closed his eyes. He thought about Maria's brother Daniel, a boy he'd never met, singing in the shower, singing while doing homework, singing down the street because music was the only thing that made sense when nothing else did. He thought about his own losses, the father who left, the friends who drifted away, the pieces of himself he'd hidden for so long he'd forgotten where he put them. And then he opened his mouth and began to sing. His voice cracked on the first word. It wasn't strong. It wasn't polished. It wasn't anything close to what a professional singer would deliver. A few people in the front row shifted uncomfortably, their smiles frozen, unsure now whether this was supposed to be funny or not. But Keanu kept going. He sang about broken faith and cold love. He sang about battles lost and truths that hurt. And something started happening as the song unfolded, something that nobody in that room had anticipated. His voice steadied. Not because it became technically better, but because something real started pouring through it. All those years of loneliness, all that grief he'd never properly released, all the masks he'd worn in interviews and on red carpets, it all began bleeding into the lyrics like ink spreading through water. By the second verse, the room had gone completely silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting for their turn to laugh, real silence. The kind that falls when a group of strangers suddenly finds themselves witnessing something raw and unguarded, something they weren't prepared for, something that makes them feel like intruders in a private moment. In the third row, a woman in a red dress pressed her hand against her chest. She was thinking about her own father, gone now 3 years, how she'd never told him she loved him before the heart attack took him away. Near the bar, a man in his 60s set down his whiskey glass. He was remembering his first wife, the one who died young, the one whose face he still saw in his dreams, even though he'd remarried and built a new life. At her table near the back, Maria was crying, not the dramatic crying you see in movies, quiet tears sliding down her cheeks, her breath catching in little hiccups she tried to suppress. She was hearing her brother's voice somehow, layered underneath Keanu's voice, as if Daniel was singing along from somewhere she couldn't see. And on stage, Keanu Reeves, action star, teen comedy icon, man who had spent his entire adult life convinced he had nothing meaningful to offer beyond memorized lines and choreographed fight scenes, finally let himself feel something he'd been running from for years. The song reached its final verse. His voice cracked again, but this time it didn't matter. This time the cracks were the point. They were the spaces where the light got through. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. The last note hung in the air like smoke. And then there was silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The ballroom seemed suspended in time, frozen between what had been and what would come next. Then someone in the back started clapping, slow at first, uncertain, like they weren't sure if applause was even the right response. Another person joined, then another. Then the whole room erupted, not in the polite, obligatory applause that follows most charity performances, but something deeper, something almost desperate, as if the audience needed to release the emotion that had been building inside them. People stood up, tears were flowing openly now, even among the donors in their expensive suits, even among the celebrities who had come prepared to network and self-promote. Something had cracked open in that room, and everyone felt it. Keanu stood at the microphone, overwhelmed, unsure what to do with his hands. He hadn't expected this. He had expected laughter, maybe polite tolerance at best. Not this, never this. The organizer who had approached him earlier was standing near the stage, his mouth hanging open. This wasn't what he'd planned. This wasn't supposed to be moving. This was supposed to be a joke, a viral moment, a funny story for the tabloids. But there was nothing funny about what had just happened. Keanu stepped away from the microphone and walked off stage, his legs shaky, his heart pounding. People reached out to touch his arm as he passed, murmuring words he couldn't quite process. He nodded, smiled vaguely, kept moving. He needed to find Maria. But when he reached her table, she was gone. The chair where she'd been sitting was empty, pushed back at an angle like someone had left in a hurry. A napkin lay crumpled on the tablecloth, and beside it, a single piece of paper folded in half. Keanu picked it up and opened it. Inside, in careful handwriting that slanted slightly to the right, were 4 words. "Thank you, Daniel's sister." And below that, an address. Keanu stared at the paper for a long moment. Around him, the gala continued, people talking about what they'd just witnessed, speculating about whether it was planned, wondering if Keanu Reeves had secret musical training nobody knew about. But Keanu wasn't listening. He was thinking about a girl who had lost her brother, who sat alone at parties because her mother worked in the kitchen, who had somehow seen something in him that he hadn't seen in himself. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Tomorrow, he decided he would find that address. He would find Maria. He needed to understand what had happened tonight, what had really happened, beneath the applause and the tears and the unexpected standing ovation. Because something had shifted inside him, something had unlocked, and he had a feeling that 12-year-old girl held the key to understanding what it was. What Keanu didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, was that Maria had left the gala early for a reason that had nothing to do with being overwhelmed by his performance. Her grandmother had collapsed at home. The ambulance was already on its way. And by the time Keanu found that address the next morning, he would walk into a situation far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than anything he'd experienced on that stage, the address that led to heartbreak. There's something about the morning after a moment that changes you. The world looks exactly the same streets, same traffic, same sun pushing through the clouds, but you're different now. You're carrying something you weren't carrying before, and everything feels slightly off balance, like you're walking through a dream you can't quite wake up from. That's how Keanu felt when he woke up the next morning in his small Hollywood apartment. His throat was still raw from singing. His eyes were tired from a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of what had happened on that stage. But more than anything, he kept thinking about that folded piece of paper in his jacket pocket. "Thank you, Daniel's sister." And the address below it. By 9 o'clock, Keanu was in his car, driving east through Los Angeles. The neighborhoods changed as he went, the manicured lawns and expensive storefronts giving way to smaller houses, chain-link fences, apartment buildings with laundry hanging from balconies. This was a different LA, one that tourists never saw, one that existed just beyond the shimmer of Hollywood. The address led him to a modest apartment complex in East LA, 3 stories tall, faded yellow paint peeling from the walls, a courtyard in the center where children's toys lay scattered on cracked concrete. It wasn't a bad place, just tired, worn down by years of housing families who worked hard and never quite got ahead. Keanu parked across the street and sat in his car for a moment, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? What was he going to say? He'd met this girl for 1 hour at a charity gala. He'd sung a song. That was it. That was the entire extent of their relationship. But something kept pulling him forward, some invisible thread that had been tied between them the moment she looked up from that tablecloth and met his eyes. He got out of the car and walked toward the building. The apartment was on the 2nd floor. Unit 2B. Keanu climbed the outdoor staircase, his footsteps echoing against the metal steps. When he reached the door, he hesitated again, his hand raised to knock but not quite making contact. From inside, he could hear voices, hushed, strained, the kind of conversation that happens when people are trying to hold themselves together and failing. He knocked anyway. The voices stopped, footsteps approached. The door opened and a woman stood there, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, eyes red and swollen from crying. She was wearing a kitchen uniform, the same kind you'd see in restaurant back-of-house staff. This had to be Maria's mother. She stared at Keanu for a long moment, confusion flickering across her exhausted face. Then recognition dawned. You're the actor," she said slowly. "From last night, Maria told me about you." "Yes, ma'am, I'm Keanu. I met Maria at the gala and she left this note." He pulled the folded paper from his pocket. "I wanted to make sure she was okay." The woman's face crumpled, just for a second, the mask of composure slipping to reveal the raw grief underneath. Then she pulled herself back together and stepped aside. "You should come in," she said quietly. "Maria will want to see you." The apartment was small but clean, every surface organized with the kind of careful attention that comes from having very little and treating it with respect. A crucifix hung above the doorway. Family photos lined the walls, quinceañeras, graduations, birthdays. Keanu noticed several pictures of a teenage boy with Maria's same dark eyes and gentle smile, Daniel. Maria was sitting on the couch, her knees pulled up to her chest, staring at nothing. When she saw Keanu, something shifted in her expression, surprise, then confusion, then something that might have been relief. "You came," she whispered. "You left an address," Keanu said, trying to keep his voice light. "I figured that meant something." Maria's mother, Rosa, she introduced herself, gestured for Keanu to sit down. He lowered himself into an armchair across from Maria, suddenly aware of how out of place he seemed in this apartment, with his expensive jacket and Hollywood haircut. "What happened?" he asked gently. "Why did you leave the gala?" Maria looked at her mother. Rosa nodded, her jaw tight. "My grandmother," Maria said. "She collapsed last night, right after I got home. My mom called 911, but..." Her voice broke. She took a shaky breath. "She's in the hospital. They don't know if she's going to wake up." The words hung in the air like stones. Keanu felt his chest tighten. He'd come here expecting. What? A thank you. A chance to understand the connection he'd felt. Instead, he'd walked into a family's worst nightmare, and he had no idea what to say or do. "I'm so sorry," he finally managed. "I shouldn't have. I can leave if you need." "No," Maria said quickly. "Please stay, just for a little while." Zoe stayed. Rosa excused herself to make phone calls, the hospital, relatives, her work to explain why she couldn't come in today. Maria sat on the couch, still hugging her knees, and Keanu sat across from her in silence. Not the awkward silence of strangers, but the heavy silence of people sharing a weight they didn't know how to carry. After a while, Maria started talking. She told him about her grandmother, Elena, how she'd raised Rosa alone after Maria's grandfather died in a factory accident, how she'd worked 3 jobs to put food on the table, never complained, never asked for help, how she'd been the one to hold the family together when Daniel got sick, when the hospital bills piled up, when hope started to feel like a luxury they couldn't afford. "She's the strongest person I know," Maria said. "She's not supposed to be the one in a hospital bed. That's not how this works." Keanu listened. He didn't try to offer solutions or false comfort. He just listened, the same way he had at the gala, giving Maria the space to say what needed to be said. "When Daniel died," she continued, "my grandmother didn't cry, not once. She said crying was for when the work was done and there was still too much work to do. She helped my mom with the funeral arrangements. She handled the bills. She made sure I kept going to school, kept doing my homework, kept eating meals even when I didn't want to." Maria paused, her eyes distant. "But sometimes, late at night, I would hear her through the wall, talking to Daniel, like he was still there, telling him about her day, asking him questions, laughing at jokes only they understood." She wiped her eyes. "I think that was her way of crying, when nobody could see." Keanu felt something crack open inside him. He thought about his own losses, the father who left, the friends who faded, the loneliness that had followed him like a shadow for as long as he could remember. He'd built walls around those feelings, convinced himself that vulnerability was weakness, that keeping everything inside was the only way to survive. But sitting here in this small apartment with this grieving girl, he realized something. Those walls hadn't protected him, they'd just made him lonely. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. Maria nodded. "When I was growing up, we moved around a lot. New schools, new neighborhoods, new faces. I learned early that getting attached hurt too much, so I stopped letting myself get close to people. I thought that was strength. I thought that was how you survive." He paused, choosing his words carefully. But last night when I was singing that song, something happened. I felt connected to you, to the audience, to something bigger than myself. And it scared me because I realized how long I'd been running from that feeling. Maria was watching him intently. I think your grandmother understands something I'm just starting to learn, Keanu continued. That strength isn't about not feeling things. It's about feeling them anyway and still showing up, still doing the work, still loving people even when you know it might hurt. Rosa came back into the room, her face pale. She'd just gotten off the phone with the hospital. They're running more tests, she said, her voice barely steady. They say the next 24 hours are critical if she wakes up. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Maria stood up immediately. I want to go see her. The doctor said only one visitor at a time, and visiting hours don't start until. I don't care, Maria interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. She needs to know we're there. She needs to hear our voices. Daniel always said that's what kept him going in the hospital, knowing we were close by, knowing we hadn't given up. Rosa looked exhausted, overwhelmed, like a woman being pulled in too many directions at once. Keanu could see the impossible math she was doing in her head, the hospital visit, the time off work she couldn't afford, the bills that were already piling up. Without thinking, he spoke up. Let me help. Both Rosa and Maria turned to look at him. I have a car, I can drive you to the hospital, and whatever else you need, meals, time, anything, I want to help, please. Rosa's pride flickered across her face, the instinct to refuse, to handle this alone, to not accept charity from a stranger. But then she looked at her daughter, at the desperate hope in Maria's eyes, and the fight drained out of her. Okay, she said quietly, okay. 20 minutes later, they were in Keanu's car, driving toward the hospital. Maria sat in the back, her forehead pressed against the window, watching the city blur past. Rosa sat in the passenger seat, clutching her purse like a lifeline, her lips moving silently in what might have been prayer. Keanu kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was racing. He'd come here looking for answers about what had happened on that stage. Instead, he'd found himself pulled into a family's crisis, connected to people he barely knew but somehow couldn't walk away from. And underneath it all, a question kept turning over in his mind. Why me? Why did Maria leave that note? Why does this feel like something I'm supposed to be part of? He didn't have answers yet, but as he pulled into the hospital parking lot, as Maria scrambled out of the car before it even fully stopped, as Rosa whispered, "Thank you," without meeting his eyes, Keanu made a decision. He wasn't going to run from this, not this time. Whatever was happening here, he was going to see it through. What he didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, was that inside that hospital, in a room on the 3rd floor, Elena was about to wake up. And the first words out of her mouth would be a name. Not Rosa's name, not Maria's name. A name that would change everything.